up, insiders? Harrison and Whatley here with Actionable Insights. We are here for the January Price List Update Summary. Now, historically, over the past 2 years or so, Whatley
2 years.
Whatley and
4 years. That's because you weren't writing them.
That's
2016 February this started.
That's very true. We've been writing price list update summaries. As you well know, Xactimate puts out new price lists every month for the 460 plus different regions that they have price lists for. And we highlight the new line items that were added to the Xactimate price list. We talk about changes to existing line items, clarifications and whatnot. So historically, these have been a long paper that we put together with various images, and we're never quite sure if anybody actually reads them. But if you look at the post date for this video, which will be April, we are recording about January. So we are a little bit delayed in our own price list update summaries. So we thought the best way to get this out there to the people is to record a video. And we are here in a Zoom call. And as you can see on my shared screen here, we've got an ESX open with some of the new line items from January 2020, as well as the eService Center link that includes some information about this. And we're going to jump into components, yields, descriptions, and kind of analyze what new line items were added to the price list and how are they meant to be used accordingly. So Whatley, let's start with the top here. We've got some new items added for the January 2020 price list, and I've grouped them on the left side into the various groups. So the first is we've got 3 new line items here for 110 volt wiring. Note that this one, line item 4 with the F9 note here, this one already existed. So there was a 12-2 copper metal clad armored line item, but they've added 110 volt, 14-2, 14-3, and 12-3. Can you talk a little bit about what the intention was here?
Well, first of all, when you're dealing with wiring, you have to understand that everything is counterintuitive. So let's first deal with gauge. So gauge often throws people off that aren't C-series electrical contractors, in so much as the number gets bigger, the wire actually gets smaller. So a 2-gauge wire is going to be about the diameter of my thumb. A 4-gauge wire might be the diameter of maybe my pinky finger, and so it goes. So in this particular case, your 12-gauge wire, a lot of times you'll see 12-gauge wire for like a really heavy-duty extension cord. It's about as big as you see. The biggest I've ever seen for 220 is a 10-gauge wire, but that's super rare, hard to get a hold of. 12-gauge wire is like a really thick, heavy-duty cord. A 14-gauge wire is what you'll commonly see as an extension cord, especially if you're running 50 or 100 feet. And then occasionally you'll see like a 16 or 18-gauge wire, and you might use that only, not in a commercial environment, but maybe for stringing Christmas lights, something of that nature. So that small green wires, extension cord, those are going to be 16 gauge, 18 gauge wires. So, all right, so we've got the first number, right? So in this particular case, the 12s are going to be larger gauge wire and probably more expensive, more copper. Then the second number, that actually refers to how many wires are within that run of conduit. And so you actually have to add one. So if you've got a 14-2, that means you've got 3 wires, red wire, white wire, black wire, green wire, with a 14-2. Yes. So if it says 2, you'd have 3 wires. I don't know why I paused there, but anyhow, you would add 1 for 3 wires. With your, say, 12-3, you've got 2 black wires there. So 2 live wires. So even though it says 3, you actually add 1.
You are providing some excellent background, or really on the specific colors and the wires that you've seen. Unfortunately, what I'm seeing in these 4 line items is that the picture itself is the same under the item image.
Yeah.
So it's not actually showing any difference in gauge or number of wires there. Why, which is unfortunate. Why do you think that they added these 3 line items, the 14-2, 14-3, 12-3 copper? Especially if the 12-2 existed.
Yeah, I think that As their macros have become more elegant and complex for electrical, they've wanted to maintain more of a bias towards granular line items. It, that might have something to do with it. I think pulling heavier gauge wire has started to become more customary as we run to a 200 amp panel, 300 amp panels. And with the introduction and broad adoption of EVs, electric vehicles, pulling heavier wire has definitely become more customary. I mean, that said, if you're pulling wire, you know, in my particular house, when we pulled wire from the panel over to the garage, unfortunately, the panel wasn't anywhere near the garage. We actually had to pull 4 gauge wire over so I could run 220 at 50 amps. So some pretty thick wire. So this would typically only be in like, well, as it says, you know, the 110 environment. But if you wanted to charge an EV, you start running with some heavier gauge wire. But generally, everything's taken way more power than it did in the 70s. It's just a different world.
Got it. So now we have some more specific narrow line items to hopefully alleviate some of that back and forth or confusion between contractors and adjusters trying to figure out what is the best line item to represent the wiring that's needed for this particular location. And I like that you brought in Xactimate's own macros, especially the electrical one, where we are a big fan of the macros that come included in the Xactimate software. With
Totally
HVAC,
underutilized. How often do you and I train? You have a group of 60 people. How often do you use electrical macro? What? What?
nobody,
Yeah.
HVAC, electrical,
Plumbing,
plumbing, and what's the last
insulation.
installation? Yeah, okay.
They
Excellent. All right,
all are really, really awesome. And it was a lot of work for them to put together, and they're criminally underused for reasons I don't understand.
100%. Let's take a look at, there's 6 line items here. There's an HMR bag with 2 Gs, bag greater than sign, TCR H bag, WTR H bag. For the purposes of our discussion here, I've only included the normal ones, none of the large bag line items.
Yeah.
And I wanted to talk about, you know, we've seen that black contractor bag, DMO bag, that was added to the Xactimate price list back in 2017, 2018. What's happening here? What are these plastic glove bags that are used for hazardous waste cleanup, et cetera?
Would be cool if they had an image here. Okay.
Would be.
So imagine like an asbestos pipe, like it's going to be gray typically, and you want to work on that, and you might be disrupting it such that it would be friable, such that the fibers could be emanating in the air. But you don't want to go and set up negative air and all this outside containment. What you can actually do is use like a 6 mil plastic that'll come over, you tape the top and the bottom, and then inside of it you stick your arms. And I did this when I got my DOSH license with, ECT. I did my 40 hours for building supervisor for DOSH, and like we had to stick our arms to this thing. And so, kind of imagine a movie like Contagion, right? When it's level 4 and they're in there sticking their arms through and they're kind of behind glass, right? And they're sticking their arms and they're working on something that's a similar environment, although a little less sophisticated, that you're trying to create with a bag. So often it's misconstrued like we're putting our gloves in another bag. This is where, as an adjuster, you get so frustrated. You're like, what are you doing? You're billing me to put, you're billing me what, like $10 for a bag to put your gloves in when you're done? That's not what it all it is. It's a very specialty piece that's used for abatement. And to that end, as it relates to property insurance, Harrison, it just doesn't come up that often.
Sure.
It's just not very often that it would be warranted to include this light item in a property insurance
2
ecosystem.
things I want to point out and the kind of slight differences in these line items. First off, while they have the same selector code and different category codes, the descriptions slightly change depending on the category code that the line item's in. So obviously, if it's HMR, these plastic glove bags are used for hazardous waste cleanup. If it's TCR, they're used for trauma crime scene cleanup. And I like the difference here in the WTR for hazardous material cleanup. So there's a difference between HMR hazardous waste cleanup and the WTR hazardous material cleanup. And you'll see here that it's just the material line item. Used for hazardous infection material removal and disposal, excludes any labor. And we can confirm that by coming here to the unit price and clicking this I information next to the replace price here, and you can see that the only component in this line item is a material one. this leads me to my second point about the differences between these three line items. We try to ask a gotcha question sometimes when we train, when it goes, plastic eye goggles, for example, protective eye goggles. Is the price more or less expensive between WTR and HMR? And the answer is they're the exact same price. And that is shown here between HMR, TCR, and WTR H bag. They are all the same price. Note this is the San Diego January 20 price list. They're all $9.85. And so the material component price is the same regardless of the category. There's no actual labor included in these line items that would cause them to be different prices or different RCV. And each one includes, in the additional item information here, excludes any labor. So important to note, 3 to 6 new HVAC line items in the HMR, TCR, WTR category code, but these are all material only line items, so the price won't actually deviate from category to category. Lastly here, we've got some individual additions, right? Those line items were in groups, they were all related to each other, but let's take a look at these 3 line items that are also added in January. You've got erosion control for silt fencing. You've got fence post 8. Note that there's a fence post 4, a fence post 6, so they've added up to a 7 to 8 foot high fence as well. And then they've got this recessed closed dryer vent box. Anything that you want to talk about with those 3 line items?
Well, erosion control, it's likely coming, the catalyst for that's likely coming out of California. If you're doing a large scale build, it was a scraper, a lot of times these building departments are asking for silt control, erosion control. And that may be a skier line item, and some of you guys watching this might not know exactly what this is, but if I describe it, I think you'll know. Is there a picture of it at all, Harrison? There's nothing, right?
Unfortunately, it's looks like
Okay.
you're
There's
out of
nothing. So it's just like a simple stake, wooden stake, 36 inches. Maybe the stake's going to be another foot longer than the black silt. And it's kind of this plastic where it kind of rolls up,
There we go.
fabric-y plastic.
Bring it up a
And
little
then
bit.
I don't see anything. Yeah, that's right. And so you just jam that into the ground, and then that way you just control your runoff. And so it's really common with farming, but it's also becoming more common with construction. And so I can recall pulling permits in California and that becoming an issue, especially if you're dealing with any kind of grades. So they want to be sure to keep that erosion from getting into the waterways and water systems. So they ask contractors to manage that. And so that's probably why that line item has been added. So that's valuable and good. Let's see the post. There was probably other post.
Yeah.
This is
Post
probably a
8 and post 8.
smaller post
This is
than,
now post 8.
right, yeah. So there's just a smaller post for doing metal posts for fencing. That's pretty straightforward. If you're using a smaller post or you're replacing it to pre-loss condition, now you've got the line item as opposed to what was probably 3 3/8 as the more customary
Actually,
line item.
no. There was a fence post 4. Here, I'll bring them up. A fence post 4 and a fence post 6. Note that it's the
Yeah,
same diameter, but they never had something that went up to a 7 to 8 foot high fence. So
got
the
it.
big difference is they've just added higher fences as
Oh,
people.
okay. So the 2 3/8. So the diameter isn't changes at the height.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So we
Yeah,
just
I mean,
more
fencing
height.
is such a weird thing in because again, in the property insurance space, so often fencing isn't covered, and to the extent that it is covered, it's fully depreciated in almost all these DP6, HO3 policies. I can remember early in my days of being a general contractor going, oh, fence blew down, right? Big storm, all these calls for fences, like, great, we're gonna do all this work, and then, we put it together and we put our bids forth and we sent that off to the carrier and they're like, okay, great, we're going to pay the policyholder $19. I'm like, what do you mean? And it was because they were fully depreciated. I mean, the fences that get blown down in a storm are often the ones that have outlasted their reasonable life expectancy.
Fair.
So again, this line item probably isn't going to be used that commonly, but I guess it's better that we have it than don't have it. So now we've got a
Yeah.
7 to 8 foot fence. But do keep in mind that most of these policies in the continental United States are written as it's depreciating. It's not RCV. It's a ACV basis for fencing, even if everything else in the property is RCV.
Got it.
Closed vent box. This is a good one, dude. I could have used this one many times after a fire. So there wasn't a line item for this. I remember creating it, any number of things. So this was a really solid addition. And line item number 10 there, closed dryer vent box recessed, I think will be used on a real regular basis.
Awesome. let's take a look. Those are the new line items. We highlighted, 9 of the 12 here. There were some price list item modifications that we like to talk about in our price list update summaries. But as I reviewed this, you'll see almost everything is removing or adding texts or clarification of components. There are no major yield changes or what would result in price changes to the line items from January 20. I don't see any major changes here. Of note, when I look at this FPL AV with the fireplace, you can see that there was a added text to the note field of the plus replacement definition to clarify the labor yield assumptions addressed the contractor using their own scaffolding and/or ladders for one-story applications. So oftentimes in the claim settlement process, when there is confusion or really when two people look at the same line item and they think different things, we head to the additional item information to clarify what's included, what's excluded. And so the pricing department is doing what they can to clarify for contractors and adjusters discussing scopes as to here was the intention of this line item, here's what was included in this line item. And oftentimes, when we talk to Pine and Cameron and that team, they've got the answer right there. They know what it is, but it's not always communicated through the additional item information. So for them to add this clarifying text is excellent, hopefully alleviates some of that friction. Our goal at AI is to help people fall in love with their jobs. So if line items are more clear, then ideally there's less back and forth, less friction, and people can settle these scopes and get to work. So
yeah, and this line item for masonry fireplace, again, obscure. I think what they're trying to do here is similar to like the bowling alley line item. Do you know there's a donut production line item? Automated system, 74 dozen an hour. Yeah, there's a line item for that. I think it's like 225 Gs or something. Those line items include a lot of auxiliary things and a lot of other assumptions. And so these more obscure line items, it's not like they're saying like masonry, brick, and then it includes scaffolding. It's saying this is a particular, they've arrived at this line item by using top-down feedback, by querying contractors that done explicitly that function, and there's no need to break it out in such a granular way where they would separate scaffolding, etc. They are providing plenty of space for billing for scaffolding and related safety material for over 20 feet, which is great, which is fairly common, right? The two-story home, so on, but the single story, it's assumed that it's all included. And so you can guess that there was some significant argument that took place, got to the pricing department, and they chose to clarify it in that way. So I think it's a fairly noble clarification that most sides of the claim will find palatable.
Agreed. Let's take a look at the material components that were added here. There's 7. As you can tell, these are directly related to the 12 new line items in January 2020. There were some small changes to descriptions and texts for some of the existing material components. And miscellaneous changes. Sometimes people forget that Xact's not just working on revising its own line items or creating new line items. Oftentimes, Xact is deploying its resources towards figuring out what's happening with state regulation, taxes. I know in 2018, 2019, tax on labor became a big thing in various states. So I just wanted to highlight here, you'll see that there was changes to our Pennsylvania insiders. Basically, there's Xactimate added an additional job type, a CDC total tax, that allows that if you as a user determine that dry cleaning or laundering items are taxable in the CDC garment and soft goods cleaning category, you can select for a CDC total tax for each appropriate line item in a standard jurisdiction. So these regulations, these state laws and tax rates change on a regular basis. So it's nice to know that they're on top of it and providing contractors and carriers and really the policyholders the opportunity to be fairly reimbursed based on whatever changes are happening in the tax rates on labor, materials, services, whatever it may be in that area. And last but not least, always a fun one, updated worker wage in all areas as applicable. So if you haven't seen our pricing feedback Xactac or have not been submitting through it, you'll see there's an expert tips or an exact tip that Pine put together, Greg Pine, to help people understand Xactimate's pricing feedback. So the more feedback they get, the more the action that they'll be able to take based on the numbers and the deviations from their existing prices at this time. So always a friendly reminder to be submitting your pricing feedback on a regular basis in whatever preferred method that you find. Future changes and whatnot, we don't need to focus on that because we're going to be talking about them. We've got a February video coming, we've got a March video coming, we've got an April video coming. But this is the first of this Plus series, the AI Plus series, Price List Update Summary. Hope you guys enjoyed. Whatley, thanks for taking some time to jump on this call with me to talk through the January Price List Update Summary. And we will have the February one to you soon.
Yeah, and do guys give us some feedback on this new format. It used to take me around a week to write this up and do all the calculations, and then another week to go through our technical writer, and then another week to do all the design. Nearly a month worth of work. Guys, if we can do this and this is more palatable to you guys and even more valuable, then this is a great way, I think, to deliver this message and chop it up. But you guys might hate it. I don't know. But for us, it might work better, and for you, it might work better. So to the extent that it does, do let us know. And to the extent that it doesn't, don't. No, I'm just kidding. Do let us know if it's not working for you. We want to make sure that whatever we're doing, it's providing value to the audience at large. So anyhow, thanks for your support out there. Comment down below. Let us know what you think about the new forum.
Excellent. We'll see you guys soon.